people here. It's great to have so many guests and so many people here for this important day. I'll introduce our committee members quickly, and then Sneha, you can introduce sort of some of your guests that you want to make sure to point out.
Absolutely.
So the committee members, Dr. Phil Ferguson is here, and Dr. Lilia Monzo. And then also, I'm sorry, is
Dr. Griffiths is here, so I wanted to.
She is here. Okay, okay. Hello, and then Dr. Griffiths is here. I didn't know that. Okay, that's good. Okay, and then Sneha, would you like to make some introductions?
Yes. First, I want to just take a moment to thank my committee. Dr. Danforth, Dr. Monzo, Dr. Ferguson, and Dr. Griffiths have stuck by me and encouraged me as I tried to figure out a very non-traditional way to write this dissertation. And I really appreciate all of your support. Despite one of you being a Celtics fan, it's been a great journey. And I also want to take a moment to introduce Adam Paul Valerius, who is here today. He's the co-author and co-researcher in my research that I'm going to be presenting today. A little bit of background before I jump into my presentation. I first met Adam in January of 2016 when we worked together for a year. Adam is an autistic adult, and I got to know him and gained new perspectives about autism as he shared stories through blog posts on our website. And so that's what led us to working together to write a book together. Adam wants to break stereotypes about autism, and I hopefully am helping him get a platform to do that. I also just want to take a moment to thank my family who's here with me today. And I appreciate their support, and I see a lot of colleagues and peers of mine, and so thank you everyone for being here today. So should I jump in, Dr. Danforth? Okay, awesome. So here we go. Like I mentioned, this is a non-traditional dissertation format, so here's an outline of my chapters. The study was a two-step process. Step one of the study involved having conversations with Adam to explore how his experiences shaped his life as an autistic adult. And step two of the research, I gathered data in the form of published autobiographies, memoirs, and first-person stories written by autistic individuals. The focus of analysis throughout this project was on Adam's story, for which I used the grounded analysis element of grounded theory. And then I used the constant comparison method for the other autobiographies. And I will be going over in greater detail parts 2 and 3 and briefly part 1. Before I jump in though, I want to point out that language matters. While I respect the usage of person-centered language, Adam requested that I use identity-first language in this research in order to reflect how he speaks in real life, and explained that it is easier when talking to use identity first because it's fewer words. And I also want to emphasize that the references throughout my presentation to disability theories are not a statement of ontological positioning. I'm not commenting on if autism is or isn't a disability. I'm simply recognizing that there is a usefulness of some aspects of disability theory in relating to autism-related experiences. And I will be sharing a lot of direct quotes throughout my presentation, both by Adam and by the 20 autistic authors whose autobiographies I wrote, because I want to make sure that their voices stay central in this presentation and this research. So what's the problem that we're trying to address with this research study? Many autistic adults have contacted me with similar stories. They've undertaken various therapies, ABA, occupational therapy, speech therapy, either until graduating high school or till the age of 22, which is when funding provided through the school district for most of these services end, and they're not able to get or retain a job. Part of the problem, I think, is that there's a lack of societal understanding of the potential for adults with autism to be active and successful members of their communities and places of employment, and this is what needs to be addressed in the literature. There's also a lack of access to the available research for service providers, for college staff, for employers, and that's why Adam and I chose to publish this research as a book. And in the final version, Adam and I will both be listed as co-authors of this book. The research that does exist in academia right now does not fully utilize the first-person accounts, and of autistic people, and most of the lived experiences are told via a parent or a sibling or a healthcare provider instead of directly from an autistic person. I really like this quote here, I'll read to you. My initial internet searches revealed a distinct lack of information relating to the more mature person on the spectrum. In fact, the casual observer could have easily concluded that autistic children become neurotypical the moment they pass their 18th birthday. This, as we know, is untrue. So why exactly wasn't anyone talking about the problems older autistics face in the workplace, in their relationships, and with their mental health? Where could I read about stuff that related to me? So in 2010, I launched the self-help website adultswithautism.org.uk. It was clear that most autistic adults felt isolated, marginalized, and helpless. This autistic author was talking about his experience of being diagnosed with autism during adulthood. My research objectives in this study are to gain an understanding of the experiences and needs of individuals on the autism spectrum as they transition into adulthood, to gain this understanding by directly speaking to someone who is on the spectrum and examining the autobiographies and literature produced by autistic adults, and to disseminate this information within the field of education and psychology that may challenge and ultimately expand upon the current literature on how best to support adults as they navigate the complexities of adulthood. And I really wanted to focus on how society can provide social supports in order to achieve a sense of belonging for autistic people, rather than putting the burden on autistic people to modify their behaviors in order to achieve this sense of belonging. The research questions that guided our research was, what did Adam's story tell us about the lives of autistic people, the societal and structural responses to autism, and how do the experiences described in the autobiographical literature by autistic adults support or refute Adam's experiences? Briefly, I'll go over the theoretical framework that guided my research, which is a social model of disability. Historically, as many of you know, disability has been defined by the medical model, which emphasizes a deficit-based perspective on disability. This study, on the other hand, was guided by the social model of disability, which reconceptualizes disability as meaningful within social, political, and cultural contexts without denying the physiological aspects of impaired function. So I really like this image. It explains the medical model versus social model really well. There's an issue here. A person in a wheelchair cannot get up the stairs, and the medical model would say, the impairment's the problem. Let's teach her how to walk up the stairs or cure her. Whereas the social model of disability flips the responsibility to society. The stairs are the problem. We should build a ramp. Nothing about us without us is one of the main tenets of disability studies, which supports the social model of disability. And I just want to reiterate again that including autistic adults in the conversation about autism allows for a more complete understanding of the experiences of autistic individuals, and autistic people should be the authority over their own needs and services rather than researchers and medical professionals as it is right now. By centralizing the voices of autistic authors, this book recognizes that knowledge is based on perspective, and autistic adults are experts in autism, so collaboration with autistic adults is central to the success of autism support and inclusion. The methodology that I used was narrative inquiry. And with narrative inquiry, rather than trying to fit neatly into a theory, narrative inquiry puts an emphasis on the role of lived experiences, including all of a person's emotions, values, and experiences. And there's no fixed framework for narrative inquiry. The focus is on a person's experience and how their experiences are told, in this case, in a book. And so the purpose of using narrative inquiry is to amplify the voices of people who otherwise may not be heard. Once a person's stories and experiences are collected, they must be integrated into a meaningful story, highlighting their experiences and the larger social, cultural, and political context in which these experiences took place. So for example, as I was reading the 20 autobiographies, I realized that in the different time periods the authors wrote about reflected different societal and cultural attitudes towards autism and towards disability in general. So the authors of the earlier autobiographies, they mentioned that many psychologists told their parents that the cause of their autism was due to refrigerator mothers. And the doctors primarily recommended institutionalization as a treatment option for autism. Even the authors themselves in these earlier books, they tended to write about their autism as something to be fixed. On the other hand, the authors of autobiographies published 2010 onwards tended to use the term neurodiversity or neurotypical and largely spoke about their experiences of autism as a difference to be understood rather than a disorder to be fixed. Okay, well, the best way, part two of this, parts 1 and 3 were more academic, but part 2 was solely Adam's story and Adam's voice. And the best way for you to hear Adam's story is directly from Adam.
On Friday, December 10th, 1999, I left my high school an hour early because I was being teased by the other students. I tried to go home, but I forgot my keys, so I was locked out. My parents were home but did not let me in the house until I attempted to break the door down with a sledgehammer. Once they let me into the house, there was an hour-long shouting match, and they called the police because they felt that I was a threat. I was no threat. If they had just opened the door when I rang the bell, I would never have grabbed the sledgehammer. The police blocked the street, making me look like a terrorist. My dad wanted me arrested and sent to juvenile hall. My mom wanted me hospitalized. My parents and the police argued for an hour, and then the police decided to take me to the hospital. I was standing there, not a part of the conversation. Every time I tried to break into the conversation, I was shouted down. It was during this hospital stay that the psychiatrist at the hospital decided I needed long-term care at a facility called the Buckeye Ranch. I was very angry that I was being taken to a place where I would be locked up. When I got there, I remember thinking it looked like a jail because there were bars around the buildings, and the small room felt like a jail cell. That ended up being my home for the next 94 days. My name is Adam Paul Valerius, and this is my story. I get told that I am an inspiration and I bring hope to mental health consumers, parents, and autism parents. What I hope to achieve by writing this book is to spread that same hope to a broader range of people who I may never meet face to face. When I tell some people what I'm doing with my life, they admit they didn't think someone with this condition could do most of this because of the media stereotypes and portrayals of autism. I want to break the stereotypes. I am writing this book with Sneha, who to me represents an autism advocate. Sneha approached me to write this book to help understand the needs of autistic folks like me as we transition to adulthood. Sneha asked me to define adulthood so that we could use my definition in this book. To me, adulthood is freedom and independence, like you're finally in control of your own life instead of someone else controlling your life for you. Responsibilities come with the freedom and independence, but adulthood is being able to handle those responsibilities. Independence is like getting to see the doctor without your parents right there, having a bank account they don't have access to, paying your own rent and bills. Opportunities to meet others with my diagnosis may have existed before my adulthood, but I do not recall seeking or taking them. There were other kids at my school diagnosed elsewhere on the autism spectrum, but I was nothing like that. I didn't really want to discuss my diagnosis until adulthood when I started living my all-play, no-work lifestyle that I believe most people in Orange County, California despise me for. Now I want to educate people on how difficult it actually is for someone with autism to make money and be accepted in the neurotypical mainstream workplace and society. I use the term neurotypical to refer to people who are not diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders. I can't even describe me the person. There are just no words. But if there's one thing I could tell the world about myself, it would be that I am my own brand of eccentric. Sneha helped me put my story into words, and I am proud of my story and my life.
So, me summarizing what Adam just told you, or me even just reading his words, would not have been as impactful as you hearing Adam's story in Adam's voice, which is why it was so important to me to um, create a platform for his story. And up until even a few weeks before my dissertation was due, we were still trying to figure out the format and how can we combine this academic literature with Adam's story and not take away from Adam's story. So it was definitely been a journey getting there, but I think that the final product was able to centralize Adam and his experiences in a way that does him justice. And just a week ago, I was talking to Adam about what this process was able to do for him. And he said that he gained catharsis and attention, which many of the other authors also felt that writing was cathartic for them. And it brought attention to the experiences that they have been through. And he also felt validated because there were other autistic authors out there who could empathize with him. All right, so the final part. What does this all mean? Like I mentioned in the beginning, I used a grounded theory of analysis to code this work, and I would love to go through all of these things with you, but we'd be here till tomorrow, so I will be brief. The first cycle coding process basically helps reorganize data to develop a smaller and more select list of broader categories, themes, and concepts. And then the second cycle coding process develops a sense of categorical, thematic, conceptual, and theoretical organization from the first cycle codes. These codes and themes then lead to theories, old or new, and allow for a more thorough understanding of setting, context, and participants while helping predict and explain human actions. I will just go through one of these processes with you. Axial coding is largely a transitional cycle between initial coding and theoretical coding and determines which codes are dominant and links categories with subcategories to assess how they relate and allows the researcher to define each theme with the following components, as you can see on the slide: context, conditions, interactions, and consequence. Axial coding allowed me to think through the causation suggested by the data, which is necessary for the grounded theory of analysis. And then I used the constant comparison method with the other 20 autobiographical accounts. And this allowed me to analyze the autobiographies and discover patterns and insights representing the autism community as a whole, rather than focusing solely on Adam's experiences. And so the way I coded that was I had different themes up top, and I have pages and pages of quotes directly from these books that reflect these themes, because again, just summarizing their experiences was not the same as taking their words directly and understanding their words directly. Okay, so what were my findings? Well, the axial coding of Adam's story led to two main categories: isolation and empowerment, with several subcategories in each, but the same subcategories did not fit neatly into either main category when combined with examples from the autobiographical accounts. For example, although parental influence led to feelings of isolation for Adam and for some of the authors, for other authors, their parental influence led to empowerment. Also, even if the name of a code was the same, specific experiences contextualizing that code may have been different among various people. So we might have a code called sensory experiences, but the sensory experiences were very different depending on who was explaining them. So the constant comparison method allowed me to define the properties of my codes and use specific examples from different participants, which led to comparative patterns across authors and Adam's experiences, and think about these collective experiences through an analytical lens. And I'm just going to go through one of these with you, as much as I would like to go through all of them. There's this stereotype that autistic people prefer solitary activities. But this stereotype doesn't take into account the difference between doing something alone versus being lonely. Adam described instances of preferring to engage in activities on his own during both childhood and currently in employment, but he also described often feeling isolated, misunderstood, and craving connection and intimacy in the form of a relationship. Several authors describe similar feelings, especially how being misunderstood by society led to feelings of isolation and loneliness. Through in vivo coding, the researcher draws from a participant's own language when creating codes. And as I was coding, I noticed that Adam used the word isolation multiple times in our conversations, which is why this code is named isolation. And actually, several authors also use the words isolation and loneliness to describe their experiences. So, how do we explain or define the theme of isolation? The context, the settings in which isolation most often occurred were psychiatric hospitals, institutions, schools, homes, places of employment, and sometimes within a marriage or a friendship. The situations often leading to isolation were rejection from peers or romantic partners, being victims of bullying, lack of explanations for social rejection, being forced to abide by societal expectations, and exclusion from treatment planning and misdiagnosis. The interactions included between autistic people and service providers or medical personnel, teachers, parents, friends, and partners. The exchanges were usually one-sided in that the autistic person did not have much of a say in how an event played out, or they were rejected without being told why. As a result of these context, conditions, and interactions, many authors, including Adam, experienced mental health issues such as depression and anxiety, feelings of shame at not being able to fit in, feeling misunderstood by society, resentment towards parents or peers, and feeling like they lived in their own world because their differences were not accepted by society. Mental health, societal expectations, and medical treatment and diagnosis are listed as subcategories for isolation. And I'm going to read you a few quotes from this category. So several authors describe feeling as though they lived in their own worlds, and their worlds were different from the neurotypical worlds. Others describe feeling like an alien from a different planet and how these differences led to feelings of isolation. The first quote here: I don't understand the world and the world doesn't understand me. I'm angry at the world and the world is angry with me. I'm not allowed to be a part of the world, but I still fight for the privilege, even though I know I will never win. I'm different and there's no room for me. The harder I try, the more frustrated I get. I will always be separate from the rest. I will remain separate from that big, unattainable world. I will stay on my own planet. For many authors, including Adam, the sense of isolation and loneliness and being bullied led to mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, or suicidal ideations or attempts, which is why mental health was listed as a sub-theme of isolation. I'm reading the third quote here. And any words that did escape from my frozen mouth did so in a kind of confused, clumsy stutter. And for the second time in 6 months, my pathetic social skills had destroyed any chance of ever being with her. It's not that I wanted to die as such, it's just that I couldn't bear the pain of living any longer. I lay on Mick's bedroom floor with blood oozing from 5 gaping wrist wounds and waited for the end. Throughout his story, Adam hinted at societal expectations and how they affected him. For example, he noted that people often have been skeptical of his autism just because he can work for 40 hours a week. Many of the other authors also reflected on how their actions were misinterpreted or guided by societal expectations. I'm reading the third quote here. Living in society is the difficulty. I try my very best to carve myself a place in this society and to learn some of its rules, but it's like installing a computer program written in a different computer language. It's not compatible, and you cannot make it compatible. I am only seen as abnormal when I socialize with other people. Why? Because I don't conform to the conventional picture, a picture created by the majority and which the majority decides is normal. But what is normal? In the final stage, so I did that for all of the themes, and so now that brings me to the final stage of grounded theory of analysis, in which the researcher must specify possible relationships between the categories I described and facilitate the move from analysis to theory. The theory can be new or can elaborate on a previous theory. The central notion of this study was that autistic adults have diverse experiences and needs that are not currently being met by society. And the two proposed theories to address and understand this are the neurodiversity paradigm and monotropism theory. Although neither theory is new, they are often not used in the fields of education or psychology. So my goal is that society can understand autistic behavior through a combination of the neurodiversity paradigm and monotropism theory, and use this understanding to modify our own behavior and create a more inclusive environment for the diverse needs of autistic adults. So again, this was a concept that came through with a lot of the autobiographies. The DSM, which is what contains the diagnostic criteria for autism spectrum disorder, fails to represent or understand the lived experiences of autism spectrum disorder. So to address the diversity of needs across the autism spectrum, I created 2 tables, which I'm going to go over with you now, that use the neurodiversity paradigm and monotropism theory to present an alternative way of understanding autism. This model reflects what is currently used to understand autism, the deficit model from the DSM, and what can be used instead to better support our neurodiverse clients and to ensure better quality of life for autistic adults. So the neurodiversity paradigm was developed by autistic individuals, and it recognizes that autism is a form of divergence rather than a deficit. Many challenges that people with autism face can be alleviated by environmental changes rather than focusing on neurological differences. The focus is on individuals' strengths rather than their perceived deficits. Neurodivergence is a path to depathologize biopsychosocial differences perpetuated by predominant medical and cultural models. So in the left column here, you can see the deficit model. This wording is taken directly from the DSM. And here are some tenets of the neurodiversity paradigm and how we can think about autism. So persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction can instead be thought of as diversity of human minds, the infinite variation in neurocognitive functioning within our species. Deficits in social emotional reciprocity. Neurodiversity is a natural and valuable form of human diversity. Deficits in nonverbal communication. The idea that there is one normal or healthy type of brain or mind, or one right style of neurocognitive functioning, is a culturally constructed fiction, no more valid than the idea that there is one normal or right ethnicity, gender, or culture. Deficits in developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. Social dynamics that manifest in regard to neurodiversity are similar to social dynamics that manifest in regard to other forms of human diversity. The monotropism theory was created by neurodiverse authors as well, and it was created specifically in response to the autism diagnostic criteria in the DSM, and has been well supported by autistic people who feel it more accurately captures the meaning of autism than the DSM's diagnostic criteria. Monotropism highlights the different cognitive processes that people use to focus their attention. Some people are able to distribute attention across many different interests, polytropic, whereas monotropic people concentrate their attention on a few interests. In a nutshell, autistic people can typically pay attention to a few topics of interests that are valuable to them, but may have trouble tending to tasks that are not valuable to them, specifically because their attention resources are focused on tasks with personal value. On the other hand, they can focus very well on a task if it's valuable to them. What's really amazing is that monotropism theory was woven into every single autobiography that I read in some way and was reflected by quotes from every single theme. And yet, before this year, I've never heard of monotropism theory, and I've been working with autistic folks for about 10 years now. So let's go over again. The left is the DSM deficit model, and the right is how you can reconceptualize these things using monotropism theory. Restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities. Different cognitive processes are simply different cognitive processes that people employ to focus their attention. Stereotyped, repetitive motor movements, use of objects, or speech. The authors of monotropism theory said that our hypothesis is that the difference between autistic and non-autistic is a difference in the strategies employed in the distribution of scarce attention. That is to say, it is the difference between having few interests highly aroused, the monotropic tendency, and having many interests less highly aroused, the polytropic tendency. Insistence on sameness and flexible adherence to routines, ritualized patterns of verbal or nonverbal behavior. Those who are monotropic may have trouble attending to a task that is not perceived as valuable to them, specifically because their attention resources are focused on other tasks that do hold personal value. highly restricted, fixated interests that are abnormal in their intensity or focus. Because of the narrow attention tunnel, unrelated information might not even be processed. Hyper or hyporeactivity to sensory input or unusual interest in sensory aspects of the environment. Neurotypical language does not usually speak about experiences in terms of sensory experiences, but rather what these experiences meant or what inferences were drawn from a collection of sensory experiences. This difference in language use makes it difficult for an autistic person who might primarily experience the sensory input without the attached social inferences that we as society give it. I want to emphasize that using the neurodiversity paradigm and monotropism theory is not to say that autistic folks don't have their own support needs and challenges, but the point here is that they should be a part of the discussion in how best to support their needs whenever possible, and also which needs they even want supported. We non-autistic folks, on the other hand, need to be mindful and changing our own behaviors rather than putting the burden solely on autistic people to change their behaviors. So this leads me to the double empathy problem. The current acceptable explanation for differences in behavior is that autistic people's behaviors reflect deficits, and the acceptable form of treatment is to encourage autistic people to modify their behaviors to reflect mainstream cultural norms and expectations. The double empathy problem reconceptualizes the problem as a mutual lack of understanding of each other's behaviors by neurodiverse and neurotypical people, and the appropriate form of treatment would be to work toward understanding these dichotomous behaviors together. So what? So I presented you with these cool, well, in my opinion, cool new theories to think about things differently. But if we don't translate theory into practice, then we can't make sustainable change. So how do we do this? First, just listen to autistic people and try to understand their perspective. Storytelling helps in understanding a different person's perspective and life experiences, which is why I put so much emphasis on telling Adam's story. Okay, I had like 30 quotes, I'm not gonna lie, to read to you, but I just chose two for now. I will just read one because I'm running short on time. My way of operating is not wrong, but different, since it relates to my physical environment as I experience it. My way of compensating bridges the gap between my world and the world. My compensations are physiological and psychological devices for coping and are a vital part of my survival. Again, there's such a wealth of knowledge in these stories and these quotes, but how can we apply these things to our daily lives? Well, let me tell you. Researchers, whenever possible, collaborate with autistic researchers. I'm going to say something really controversial now, okay? Qualitative data is just as important and relevant as quantitative data. Understanding why neurodiverse behaviors occur is more important than labeling behaviors as a deficit. Centralize the voices of the people you are researching, in this case, autistic adults. Disseminate your research in ways that are accessible to the majority. This can be in books, blog posts, free articles, videos. Teachers, therapists, psychologists, and psychiatrists. A special interest, or what is referred to as a fixation or obsession in medical terms, can actually be used to everyone's advantage. Use the autistic person's special interest to gain meaningful advancements in treatment and in building rapport. Whenever possible, include the client or student in treatment planning. Autism is more than the diagnostic criteria listed in the DSM. To truly understand their needs, listen to the diverse experiences of each autistic client or student. Do not impose neurotypical expectations and activities on neurodiverse individuals. Everyone has their own set of strengths and challenges, and it is imperative to get to know your neurodiverse clients and students and work on needs they desire, not which they are imposed upon. Parents and family, whenever possible, talk with your child rather than about your child. Include your autistic child as much as you can in treatment planning. Let them share concerns and experiences with doctors, therapists, and teachers. The second point was really interesting. Many authors relayed that their diagnosis helped them understand themselves better and wish that their parents had shared with them their diagnosis earlier, or that they had been diagnosed earlier. So whenever you can, if you feel it appropriate, share your child's autism diagnosis with them. Discuss your child's specific strengths and challenges related to autism and how you can support them. Ask them if and how they feel different from their peers and how you can support them. And to all of us in general, remember, if you are confused by someone's behavior, assume that they are just as confused by your behavior. It's not the neurodiverse person's responsibility to conform to neurotypical societal norms. Understanding an autistic person's special interests is a great way to engage with an autistic person. And finally, assume that stereotypes you have about autism are not accurate. As with any study, there are, of course, limitations, and the biggest limitation of the study was that gathering one person's study and 20 autobiographies is by no means fully reflective of the many autistic adults in the world today. Although these themes serve as a starting point to understand neurodiversity, autism falls across an expansive spectrum, and the themes cannot be generalizable to the entire autistic population. Future studies, if anything here seems interesting to you, email me so we can collaborate. Although Adam's story did not indicate any sexual abuse, several autobiographies described instances of sexual abuse, non-consensual sexual encounters, and abusive relationships. Future research should absolutely explore the prevalence of autistic authors being victimized in this way and determine how we can prevent this from happening in the future. And there's a few others here. There's a lot of research that still needs to be done for autistic adults so that we can best support them. And finally, my call to action. Only someone who is autistic can be considered an expert in autism. It is imperative as researchers and as clinicians, we recognize our roles as ones of support rather than ones of authority to best serve the needs of our clients. We can start by simply listening directly to our clients to better understand their experiences and subsequent needs. We can advocate alongside them for services that they desire in a way most beneficial to them. Researchers can continue to fill the void in research related to autistic adults' experiences and needs by centering the voices of autistic adults. Clinicians can expand their understanding of autism from the DSM criteria to the lived experiences of their autistic adults. Finally, to create an equitable future for autistic adults, society needs to recognize it is as much our responsibility to understand neurodiverse needs as it is for neurodiverse individuals to understand neurotypical behaviors. I'll leave you with this quote. One day, I dreamed that we can grow in a matured society where nobody would be normal or abnormal, but just human beings, accepting any other human being, ready to grow together. Special thank you to Adam, who I am humbled to have been able to share your story. And Adam has graciously offered to answer a few questions now. So if you have any questions for myself or for Adam, now would be your chance. No questions? All right, no problem.
Actually, I wanted to say something. I wanted to say this was just so powerful. I related to this so much as an autistic individual, and it really, to me, shows how much the voices of the autism community have been silenced for so many years through our research, through our thing, and educators have so much to learn from us. We can be as teachers as well as students to each other, and how the practices for so many years. When I related this, I was saved from an institution that they were going to put me in, and I never was placed there. I can relate so much to Adam's story and the other stories you shared. And my question for you is, how do we break down the barriers to open those voices and unsilence them going forward and get our opinions into the policy decisions of society, our school districts, our support teams, our services, our right after high school transition planning and so forth from an implementation level?
A golden question right off the bat. Thank you, Stephen, for your feedback. I appreciate it. That's a really good question. And I think that as much as I want to have this big solution, I think the answer to your question is baby steps. So for me, the first baby step was finding these incredible committee members who encouraged my research that kind of went against the academic grain and focused on centralizing the voices of autistic people. The next step is in an academic world would be academic journals need to appreciate and accept more qualitative data rather than just focusing on quantitative. That's how we can get your voices centralized. That research then trickles down into clinicians to our field, and having that information broadly available and accessible to people will then hopefully start influencing policy. And then we collaborate with Dr. Cardinal and the TPI team and get that policy influenced, right?
Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen. Any other questions? Adam is available for a few more minutes before he goes back to work. Thanks, Adam, for taking the morning off of work.
Welcome.
I have a question for Adam. What do you find, for your experience, is an effective way of supporting you in the workplace so that you can maximize that focus and have great contributions? But what supports do you find are helpful for you?
I'm not actually receiving any supports that are directly noticeable, but what has helped is timing it right with disclosing my diagnosis to the supervisors above me and to HR at my current employer, because I have successfully built some very supportive relationships with them all. And I started out as a subordinate, but I have been promoted to a supervisory position, so I frequently use the phrase supervisors above me because I am supervising people in my current position. I had my performance review just a couple days ago, and it was even more favorable than last year. I've been supervising people for 2 years, and it's going okay.
Thanks, Adam.
I have a question for Adam, if I may.
Yes, please.
Hi, Adam. I just want to say I'm really inspired by your courage and your vulnerability to stand up and be noticed and be heard. And I'm just curious, like, why are you so brave? Like, what made you want to do this and be the center of this work and to be the voice to lead others?
I'm tired of being ignored online and off. I'm tired of feeling like I'm only listened to when I'm just verbally stimming and not actually talking to someone else. So I figured joining this research project of Sneha's was a way to break out of that cycle.
Thanks, Adam.
Okay.
I have a question for Adam.
Got it.
First of all, again, just to reiterate, so wonderful to see your courage, right? But I'm curious what you thought about the process of working with Sneha on this project, and I wondered if you could just share with us, maybe, perhaps what can you think of at this? I mean, obviously, in a quick moment, what you found most positive in the experience, and then what things were maybe difficult And I'm asking it. It's an authentic question, right? So that we can all learn as researchers how to do this work, and how to continually improve on it.
Okay, the most difficult parts were just talking about certain memories, especially the most painful ones from my later childhood and especially adolescence to early adulthood. But then the better parts were just, feeling the catharsis as I was getting the validation that I wish I had gotten 20 years ago, but there was just no possible way it was going to happen with who I was around at that time.
That's great, Adam. Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question, if I could, for Adam. You talk about the cathartic element of it. I'm wondering how, since you've been involved in the research, how has that changed in terms of your own world? Has it changed in terms of confidence? Has it changed in terms of opportunity? What is the difference that has been made after being involved in the research?
Confidence has certainly improved a lot because just about 7-8 years ago, I had a job developer who was telling me I didn't really have the level of confidence that's recommended for job seeking, and that has certainly improved greatly. Sneha, would you agree?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, Dr. Cardinal.
Hi, Sneha. Well done.
Thank you.
So you talked about generalization. You clearly stated that the data you shared cannot be generalized to a larger population.
Mhm.
But yet readers, listeners will tend to want to do that. And then they'll repeat what you said as if it is generalizable. Is there a responsibility of the researcher to intervene in that, or to say or do something that would help people understand really what the results mean and to whom they speak to?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that stating that is important. It's definitely important to emphasize that the works that I was analyzing were those who were willing and able to write about their stories and reflect in a way. Whereas, like I said, the spectrum is such a broad spectrum, not everyone would be able to do that. But I also, I'm thinking about this as I'm processing your question as I'm thinking, and I think, you know what, there's so many stereotypes on one end about autistic folks that sometimes you need an extreme on the other end to get to the middle. And so, yes, as a researcher, I definitely want to point out that this is not generalizable to everyone, and that's definitely something that I would state in my research, and that I do state in my research. But at the same time, it's okay to, I feel like, promote the strengths and the positive experiences of autistic folks, and hope that that broadens the view of autism. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I was just trying to be a somewhat of a voice for individuals who have disabilities, even autism, who aren't able to do the many things that the people that you talked about are, and then it creates another stereotype, as if all people in a certain category have abilities. Kind of it approaches kind of the Rain Man syndrome.
Exactly.
So I guess the question just was, as researchers, what responsibility do we have? It's an impossible question to answer completely. I get that.
We should write a paper about that, because it's a really interesting conundrum.
That's a perfect response to almost any question a professor asks during a dissertation defense. So well done, team.
All right, final call for questions. And Elise, I like your Lakers shirt.
I had to wear it in your honor.
And
Seeing as how Danforth is.
my sister wearing a Spark shirt. So
Yeah.
I see Dr. Danforth's getting up. I bet you to get his Celtics hat. No.
I had to be the opposite of Danforth to support you, Sneha. So great job.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for being here today.
Okay.
All right, Dr. Danforth, is there anything else?
No, I just wanted to. Yeah, I'm just leaning in on my computer here for a second. Thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you to Adam, especially for coming and for what you've done with Sneha, the two of you, and what you've done in your friendship, in your relationship to produce this great work.
Okay.
I appreciate you for doing that. What we're going to do is let the audience leave, and then we'll just have Sneha and the committee to talk after that. So we appreciate your coming. Thank you very much.